The number of international students choosing to study in China has continued to grow, with the country attracting nearly 500,000 students in 2018 and reaching top position as Asia's most popular study destination. Is China, the world's top source of international students, now becoming the leading destination? What are some of the controversies over international students? And what else is being done to expand China's educational influence and soft power? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Professor Shan Bin from Tsinghua University and Professor James Ray from California State University, Sacramento. We shall also cross over with Dr. Aravind Yellary, Senior Fellow of the HSBC Business School of Peking University. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Ray. Welcome to Dialogue. Bin, what do you make of the sudden surge in the number of international students in China in recent years?
I think it's because of for China's rise as one of the global power in recent years, particularly I think the implementation of Belt and Road Initiative to attract more students from outside world, particularly from the West, which is the non-Western countries. So this is actually an aim that Chinese educational institutions want to achieve, to have what we call a globalized education. A Chinese student can mix up with international students to achieve a kind of more cosmopolitan vision.
And Ray?
Well, I've been a visiting scholar at the China Foreign Affairs University and the Beijing Foreign Studies University, and so there's a wide variety of students from so many different parts of the world and coming from different cultural backgrounds and then coming to China for different reasons. I often meet a lot of government officials who are...
Are you impressed by the number of overseas students in Peking universities, universities in the
I am, and over these 10 years, again, the scale from Central Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, all over the world in scales that are really dramatic. And then I think at Beijing Foreign Studies there's 80 languages being spoken. So I think Chinese students are learning the cultures and language of all those countries, and then the students are coming here and they're creating dialogue and exchange, and then that really builds long-term relationships for commerce and diplomacy.
And I should say, compared to United States and UK, China is still in the early stage of recruiting international students. I think language, particularly, I think the main hindrance. For example, in Tsinghua, a lot of international programs still are conducted in English to attract more students. If you conduct in Chinese, of course, you have a very small size of students. So I would say China is actually lies in a stage of growing pains when you encounter a lot of trials and tribulations to have this host institution and get students. They must have a lot of cultural shock or cultural conflict.
But I believe English is not a barrier. It's not a major issue for Indians. So let me cross over to Mr. Aravind Yellary, Senior Fellow with the HSBC Business School, Peking University, for his thoughts on why China is becoming more attractive for international students. Aravind, what do you make of the issue we are talking about here in the Beijing studio?
I think it is quite obvious. Yeah. A country like China with enormous growth rate, which is blooming economy and becoming the center of Asia, it is quite obvious that any country which is providing enormous opportunities for business growth, education, skilled human resource becomes an epicenter for attraction, and that is the reason China is becoming one of the favorite spot wherein foreign students are picking up not only the courses in behavioral sciences but also in sciences, because the universities in China offer the best ecosystem to take the education as well as find opportunities when they graduate quite easily. And this is prevalent not in Asia but beyond Asia. Look at Africa, look at Latin American students who are coming to China and enrolling for higher education studies here.
There's no question about China's economic expansion, which is very rapid in recent years. However, Aravind, if we draw a comparison between India and China in terms of which is more attractive to students from OECD countries or democratic countries, do you think India will be ahead of China? Because you have different institutions which might allegedly appeal more to the mind and heart to students from Western countries. What do you think of this question?
India does attract students from across the globe, and they also want to come and join Indian universities. But if we put across Indian universities compared to Chinese universities, if you go and look at the global ranking, the Chinese universities are much ahead than the Indian universities as far as the global ranking is concerned, for obvious reasons. I think because of the rigorous research system, publications and patents, and also the big high-tech labs the Chinese universities have, even the public universities, I'm not talking about private universities. So I don't think it is any it is of any matter whether you're a democratic country or a country from the Commonwealth family, but it is more important for students what kind of opportunities you're providing to them, to pick up their abilities, to hone, to intensify their expertise. And I think the Chinese universities are doing pretty well in this case.
Ray, I was asking whether India would be more attractive to international students, particularly those from Western countries, because of its political institutions. Do you buy my idea that India could make a big difference in this particular regard?
Well, it has the advantage of the English language being spoken widely. I think there are sometimes unfamiliar attitudes toward India, and that leads Western students to feel insecure coming to a developing country like India or even China, which has made that kind of transition. I think they don't know what the system will be like, they don't know what the lifestyle is like, and they often have, particularly American students, kind of negative impressions of foreign cultures and other countries, and worried. And there are sometimes American students matriculating even into China for first year for a 4-year degree, but I think there's some barriers there in the attitudes in the West.
This election burned most amount of the money, most expensive election in the history of India since its founding with the end of the Second World War. Now, it seems India would spare no effort in building its soft power, and therefore spending more money attracting international students would of course be prioritized on the agenda of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In contrast with India policies, what do you think of the policies that the Ministry of Education has rolled out in recent years to attract?
I agree with you that in China we consider educational diplomacy the very important index for what we call public diplomacy to enhance China's national image, or as you just referred that we need more people actually to stay in China for a longer time, to have an immersion in Chinese environment, to have a better understanding of Chinese political social system. But on the other hand, I would also think that in China this is almost like our media Go Global campaign. We have a cultural Go Global campaign. This is a kind of national campaign because of Chinese political system. We use a lot of money, we use a lot of energy, a lot of human resources to invigorate these international students come to China to try to enhance our soft power.
The confidence of much of the policy options that the Ministry of Education has rolled out in recent years, James, could somehow cause more controversies than positive repercussions for particularly Western countries. They would either accuse you of being a little bit too assertive in promoting traditional culture of China that they find difficult to accept, or they would have a growing sense of a myth from this country whose different roadmap of development has kept them puzzled instead of informed them of a very useful experience. What do you think of, say, the outcome of China's campaign of promoting our soft power? Taking TCM, for example, that's very controversial, isn't it?
Well, on the one hand, if we look at the United States, international students don't get very much support. They have to make it on their own, and maybe we'll talk about some of the incidents where Chinese students have been harmed in the United States, and of course the case in Illinois. In China, there's a lot of effort to welcome students from all over the world and have students there who learn the language, learn the culture, and welcome them. And I noticed that's very dramatically different than in the United States, where people are paying to come to the United States but are not getting many services. And in China, the Chinese government is often supporting those students from all over the world and then giving them these kind of services but then, want to make sure that there's no incident and is, comfortable that the students are acclimating to what the Chinese culture is.
But I would also add one point that in China, normally we have a very guest-friendly culture compared with most Western countries. I think Ray and myself, we are all international students in US and UK, but we did not actually treat it differently from our Western counterpart. But in China, we do have a lot of special arrangement. For example, in China, every university student must take Marxism as a compulsory course, but not for international students. They are relieved of Marxism education. This is only one example that we can actually cater to the needs of international students, let alone those lifestyle or daily expenses or other affairs. So I think basically China has a very guest-friendly culture compared with other countries.
Well, I might just add, one of the cross-cultural tensions sometimes is because Western students, particularly Americans, don't like to be handled and don't like to be managed and want to be independent.
Yeah, you're right.
And so that takes getting used to for foreign visitors to...
That's what I call a culture shock. It's between these two different cultures. Yeah.
Let me go back to Aravind. The number of China-based African students increased 26-fold to around 50,000 between 2003 and 2015. That's amazing, very impressive figure, according to the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. Aravind, that puts China second only to France in terms of the number of students it attracts from African countries. Question, do you have any preferential policy towards African students in India? Because Prime Minister Modi also has a strong ambition to promote a global influence of India, which is considered also like a civilization state, the way China considers itself, the past glories and the grand future. So let's look at the issue of African students and the attractions of India and China for them, for this particular international students, this particular group of international students.
Yes, the Minister of Education, Government of India, is paying special attention to its ties with African countries, and I think that one of the best and easiest way to connect with African countries, beside investing in infrastructure projects or building up businesses, is also to help Africa and build their own repository of human resources, skilled human resources. And I think is in Asia, after China, I think India offers best opportunity for African students to come here, enroll for postgraduate programs and also for higher education. I think there is a certain level of awareness among Indian education institutions, private as well as public, that they have to provide helping hand to Africa to come up to a level. And this is also evident in past few years' experience, because India is near to Africa, the connectivities India offers to African countries, and students coming from Africa and taking up sciences and behavioral sciences as their mainstream subjects, it's growing. And I think it's evident in the last 15 years, specifically speaking. India is helping these countries to come up and enroll at the Indian universities here.
India has its own advantage of a soft power. Now, the next issue is very much about whether religions could be respected in your country. India is known for having many ethnic groups and very diversified religious beliefs. But do you think you have done enough to attract international students by giving due respect to their religious faith?
I think when international students come to India, they come with an image that yes, India is a country which follows a stream of religions. And I think that they do respect and they do keep certain level of tolerance to Indian religious beliefs. But I think in Indian education system, if you go to Indian campuses, they are not really overwhelmingly talking about religion on the campuses, because most of the campuses where the foreign students come, for example African students come, they equally enjoy good ecosystem, where they respect cultural tradition beliefs of the India, as well as India allows them to practice their own religion. And I think it is a harmonious campus system, campus life India provides to African students here in India.
With China's further integration with the rest of the world, and when we look at particularly the increase of the number of international students, do you think likewise university authorities in major cities in China would have to also respect cultural diversity, particularly religious beliefs?
I would definitely think so, because I think, like I said, China basically has a very guest-friendly culture. I think we would like to cater to the needs for our guests, like when we sponsor Olympics or other major international events. You will find that China actually has more hospitality than any other sponsors outside the world. So the point now is that actually Chinese public opinion really have a different perspective on this. Is it because we have the more consciousness of equality? We must treat the foreigners and Chinese on the same basis. So that's why
double standards should be encouraged.
Yes, it caused a lot of controversy in recent years.
But China does roll out many preferential policies to attract the students from BRI countries. I mean, countries along the stretches of the Belt and Road Initiative. Do you think this means, because China makes investment in particularly developing countries to help build infrastructure, as part of this campaign, James, I wonder if you have noticed that students from BRI countries are more welcome.
Absolutely, and again, some of those are students who are coming for medical degrees or advanced degrees, and they'll go back to be professors in their country, and that will be a lifetime link. Some are government officials doing master's degrees, and then will work in the ministries in their home country, and that will be a fruitful relationship. I find when there's students at whatever level coming from those countries, they they're very welcoming, very thrilled to have the opportunity to have the financial support. They're uncertain because China's so kind of new on the global stage, what the repercussions are for their country and what the obligations or expectations of this relationship are, but they see this as a great opportunity, so they're kind of going in with their eyes wide open.
Let me go back to Aravind. What is the international standard in key colleges overseas? I mean, when we look at the issue of how to distribute scholarships on an equal basis for international students, is it based on students' merits or nationalities?
It is not based on nationalities, but international standard speaks about, for example, if you talk about European or American scholarship systems, you have to qualify, for example, for exam, and then your scores are counted. What happens in the Indian case, if foreign students are coming and enrolling for Indian universities, we usually take students who qualify with distinction and come over here, and after about 2 and 3 months, they have to undergo certain exams. They have to undergo exams in English, whether they can qualify in taking up classes in English or not, and also that also requires that we meantime the Indian universities communicate and correspond with their earlier universities, and we get confirmations for that. But there is no set standard as such globally speaking about. And if I can add about the earlier question to yours about China giving more scholarship to BRI countries, I think it is quite obvious. Before even BRI came in 2012, look at the scholarships Chinese government gave to ASEAN countries, and most of the students who went back to ASEAN countries are oiling and facilitating the interaction and integration between ASEAN and China. So it is quite obvious economically and strategically for China to offer more scholarships to countries from Belt and Road initiatives.
But I have to indicate this is because China is now still in the early stage of recruiting more international students. That's why scholarship was kind of like a very important index for us to attract more international students. Whereas in UK and the US, it's already become an industry. I think Chinese student actually is a very major contribution to US-UK economy in terms of international education.
Well, in the early days of China's opening up, a lot more scholarships must have been granted to students from developing countries, particularly from a communist country like China. Today, I wonder if scholarship policy in most of the universities in your country, James, is a lot different.
Well, for international students, as you likely know, this is a revenue stream for most American universities that are charging, I would not only say double, but perhaps quadruple the sticker price of an Ivy League education or private university for international students, and virtually no scholarships, where those same universities offer significant cutting costs for domestic students, even with those high sticker price. And so I think that's a danger in commodifying the Chinese student, and then they often are coming into their separate programs and not really getting the immersion in the culture. And I think that's different in the way that China's been handling this.
There's no question about the appeal of American dream since the opening up of China. For most of those who came back from the States say, oh, American universities and educational institutions are so good. But when you look at the controversial policies of the Trump administration in restricting the number of Chinese students in areas like STEM, do you think there's going to be more decline in the number of Chinese students heading for the United States to study sciences and technology?
Actually, the latest statistics I read today that this year application for UK university has already rise up by 30% after US take a very harsh policy toward the student visa. But on the other hand, I have to say China needs to also improve our way of managing international students, because I think a lot of international students, when they finish their studies in UK and US, they have a year called gap year. You can stay there for some kind of internship.
That's a very good point.
Yes, but in China, you cannot actually, even I could say many Chinese media organizations do not actually have opportunity for our international students have internship. So
elite education, Ambin and James, I'm afraid remains a controversial issue for the rest of the world. However, no one questions about the merits itself of these two universities, such as Oxford and Cambridge in the UK. However, do you compare Tsinghua to MIT? And it's a combination with Oxford and Cambridge.
That's a very tough question for me, because according to the recent survey, the QS survey, Tsinghua already ranked number 16, and Beida was actually number 20. We are already on among the top 20 club. But we always, as Tsinghua professors, debate one question: did you want to send your kids to Tsinghua or to Yale? Because Yale, in that survey, that ranked number 25. Did that mean Yale's education is lower than Tsinghua? So I think the problem is that we still left quite behind the major university in UK, UN in terms of internationalization. We need a more open up.
If you were to solicit opinions from the Clinton couple, they would of course opt for Yale. But let me raise the same question for Aravind. I've left you there standing by for a long while. Sorry for this, but what are your thoughts on a comparison between Yale or the best university in your country when senior government officials are considering where their children should go?
Well, the leaders and the top people, rich people, obviously would like to send their kids to United States. But having said that, let me also bring to your notice that in last 2 years there has been negative growth as far as the Indian students.
Let me stop you for where was Prime Minister Modi educated?
Oh, he educated in India.
In India. Where was Rajiv Gandhi educated? And where was his mother, Indira Gandhi, educated? They all became heads of state.
Yes. Exactly. And if you talk about Indira Gandhi, Rajiv Gandhi, or the Rahul Gandhi, even they are all educated abroad, or they are educated in India, but they are educated in missionary top private colleges or schools. So that is the reality. But I think going forward, you would see that there's a negative growth of Indian students enrolling in America, in the United States. They are trying to look for diversity. Even the banks who are giving loans to universities or to the students, they're wary of the political uncertainty in the United States, and they're not even extending loans to students. So the situation is going to change, only changing actually. We are noticing the change in the situation where the students are opting for other countries, Australia, Canada, Norway, or China is definitely yes. There has been on an average 20% growth in Indian students enrollment in China.
Aravind, we're not just talking about opportunities for undergraduates, but what about prospects for postgraduates? Yes. I mean, for a long while, many Chinese entrepreneurs and scholars have been debating and discussing the same issue. Why Indians account for most of the senior posts in big U.S. multinationals than the Chinese managers? I mean, the Indians seem to be pretty successful, more successful than Chinese managers in the big multinationals. In the United States, for example, what do you make of this reason? The reason behind the bigger success and the glow of the success of Indians in the United States?
I think it is quite obvious. What happened is most of the families, Indian families who immigrated to United States. They did it in 50s and 60s, and then the second and third generation American Indians who were educated in America, who wanted to stay back in US and join the American INCs. Of course, they were the one who would pluck the low-hanging fruits first, and that is the reason you would see that the top CEOs, executives in American INCs or multinational companies are Indians, and which was not the case with the Chinese, because I think lately in 80s and 90s, the Chinese started going to China. They invested their time, they started entrepreneurial activities, and then they started coming back. So I think that is a very much reason. I don't think there is anything related to IQ.
After all, India remains a member
here,
state,
but
a heavyweight one of the British Commonwealth. China, despite the colonial history, such as Hong Kong's history, has been pretty independent, right? So I've been very quickly. Do you think education for the Chinese students in elite education like Tsinghua would enable them, the graduates, to be employed in a better position?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of Chinese leaders are educated in Tsinghua. But what I have to emphasize is that...
For example, President Xi Jinping.
Yes, exactly. Or President Hu Jintao, for example, my tour president educated in Tsinghua. But that's not the major point. A major point is that for a country like India, they have a diverse culture from the very beginning, like you mentioned religion. For China, we were comparatively a homogeneous culture, and the whole university need more diversity. So that's why I would support recruiting more international students to enhance its diversity in the cosmopolitan vision.
Well, and I might just jump in on that, if you don't mind, to say I have colleagues in Silicon Valley and Google who argue the reason that Indians who are not living in the U.S. but are coming, the curriculum in the K-12 system and the university system is a little bit more focused on innovation and leadership and independent thinking, and that China has great outstanding outcomes, but the curriculum needs to be reformed to focus on leadership and innovation, critical thinking, and these kind of skills to rise to the senior level.
Yes, indeed, being cosmopolitan it remains a hallmark merit for American education, and India, which encourages people to have critical thinking, may make a difference in terms of cultivating leadership for business communities. That may somehow explain the differences between Chinese culture and Indian institutions.
And so will China.
Thank you so much for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.